time, but it's expected to be, again, high-density mixed-use development. So yes, there has definitely been a change in the trend of development. Moving on, our second application here is the conditional use permit for height. The C3A district allows a maximum height of 4 stories or 56 feet. The highest portion of the building, which is the peak of the angled roof line along Lake Street, is 6 stories, 72.5 feet. That then steps down to 5 stories and about 62 feet as you go to the south towards the residential. Staff finds that the proposed height increase will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, comfort, or general welfare, nor will it be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other properties in the vicinity. The subject site is located along West Lake Street, which has other buildings of comparable height on surrounding blocks. That includes the properties that I just mentioned, so the Walkway project, the Cheapo project. You have the Buzza building, which is actually east of the site. That one's been around for quite some time, definitely not a new development, and that's about 8 stories. The proposed building is in keeping with the scale and character of surrounding uses on the commercial corridor. Additionally, the proposed massing of the building will minimize the potential impact on surrounding residential uses. So the massing of the building is still concentrated along Lake Street. That's where you have the 6-story portion. It does step down to 5. I'd like to note here, I think I have that sheet. The applicant did show 2 rooftop decks on the 6th floor that were facing the south. Those rooftop decks would have increased activity on the roof, which would be outside and could certainly have an impact on the adjacent residential uses. As a condition of approval, staff is recommending that those 2 roof deck spaces be removed, and that would be a condition of approval on the CUP for height. One of the findings under the CUP is whether or not adequate measures have been taken to minimize traffic congestion in the public streets. In this case, the requirement is 35 spaces, and that takes into account both the hotel use and the restaurant use. The applicant is providing 5 spaces on site and then leasing 35 spaces off-site in the Calhoun Square parking ramp. Those 35 spaces would utilize a valet service from the hotel to Calhoun Square. That's allowed per the zoning code as it's within 800 feet of the site. The applicant did do a travel demand management plan that analyzed parking needs, mode share goals, other parking strategies or transit strategies for the building. What you're seeing here is a graphic that shows the routes that the valets are intending to use. The valets are intending to come into the site via the curb cut on Emerson, pick up or drop off vehicles in that drop off area, and exit via the alley. That would be north out of the alley and then either up Lake and out to Lagoon. Right now, the applicant is proposing to use signage to discourage any right-hand turns into the alley to keep the traffic off of the residential. That's something that is required per the TDMP, and staff has actually put a condition of approval on the staff report as well as it relates to those traffic circulation patterns. The number of parking spaces proposed certainly meets the minimum parking requirements. They've done an analysis. Mode share goals are about 30% of hotel guests would arrive to the site by car. They have other mode shares at, I believe, about 20% for guests arriving either via cab or, some other hour car, whatever it might be, Uber from the airport to the site. There are 18 bike parking spaces. Those would primarily be used by restaurant patrons and staff. However, guests who are staying at the hotel would have the opportunity to leave their car in the ramp for the duration of their stay and use those bike parking spaces or nice ride for trips during their stay. The applicant is being asked as part of the TDMP to also look at other ways to encourage guests to use transit and biking as their primary mode of transportation while they're staying on site. So based on the analysis that was done as part of the TDMP and the information provided, staff does not believe that traffic congestion in the public streets would result as part of the project. Again, for height, we look at consistency with the comprehensive plan. This is a comprehensive plan analysis per the Uptown Small Area Plan again. So In addition to the policies I called out for commercial corridors, as far as height goes, it really just calls for a minimum of 2 stories on commercial corridors to avoid underdevelopment and the underutilization of land. In the Uptown Small Area Plan, it's much more specific as it relates to height. So in the urban village, it talks for heights of 3 to 5 stories and can provide transitions in taller buildings along major corridors. Lake Street may be considered a major corridor. As you go on, it does talk about having retail at grade on Lake Street and transitioning heights as you turn the corner, approaching the existing neighborhood, which the applicant is proposing to do here by stepping the building down to 5 stories as you turn the corner along Emerson back to the neighborhood. It also calls for, in their built form diagrams here, you can see the building envelope recommendations call for generous stepbacks on the south side of Lagoon and Lake Street to minimize shadowing on streets and the Greenway, and modest stepbacks on the north side of Lagoon and Lake Street to prevent a canyon effect. The applicant is not proposing to step back the building along Lake Street. Doing that, looking at the shadow studies the applicant provided, the only shadowing impact on the north side of Lake Street is just a very small portion. You can see here. On the RB side, it just nicks a very small portion in the afternoon, in the fall, along the public sidewalk here. Aside from that, stepping the building back wouldn't really have any impact on the shadowing on the south side of the street because that's directly in front of the building. So the shadowing impacts with the way the bulk is proposed, as you see here on the public street, are really minimal if we're looking at the pedestrian experience. The building envelope further down, you can see some built form recommendation diagrams. Here, the plan calls for a maximum of 4 stories on this property. And that's this built form recommendation diagram down here, specifically looking at the urban village at Emerson Avenue. And on the south side, you can see this would be the site here, which is a 4-story building. In doing the analysis of the project, staff finds that a 4-story building with similar footprint would have the equivalent impact on adjacent uses as a 6-story building that you're seeing here based on the way the massing is proposed and the fact that the residential uses are south of the site and therefore not impacted by shadowing. The plan makes several references to strong gradual transitions between residential and commercial areas. The site's been zoned for commercial purposes since 1924. Commercial uses in existing and proposed zoning districts allow for up to 4 stories in height as of right. The physical impact that commercial development has on adjacent residential uses is primarily dictated by how that bulk is distributed. And again, here they're distributing that bulk on Lake Street. The shadow studies, again, are here. You can see there's no shadowing impact at all on the residential uses because they're on the south side of the site. The other findings under the conditional use permit for height ask us to look at the impacts on impact of light and air for significant water bodies, open spaces, and landmark buildings. Again, there's nothing under those categories that would be impacted by the proposed building. It's consistent with the character of surrounding uses. I've already mentioned those specific projects, but that's really the trend along Lake Street now, is to have 6, 7-story buildings, and that's transitioning west now outside of the activity center. I'll move on here just briefly to the floor area ratio variance. The applicant is requesting an FAR variance from 2.7 to 3.78. That's a difference of about 12,000 square feet. Staff finds that practical difficulties exist due to policy recommendations for dense mixed-use developments on the site. The site's uniquely situated on a commercial corridor and near an activity center where the recent trend of development has been for similarly scaled buildings. The proposed floor area ratio is in keeping with the spirit and intent of the ordinance and the comprehensive plan. The small area plan does not specifically reference building bulk anywhere. It talks a lot about height, but it doesn't anywhere recommend anything specific on bulk other than calling for dense mixed-use development in this location. The bulk is distributed on Lake Street again to allow adequate access to light and air for adjacent properties. This building does not qualify for any density bonuses because even though a hotel kind of looks like a residential building, it's considered a commercial use. Density bonuses aren't given for commercial uses. However, the maximum achievable floor area ratio with density bonuses for a mixed-use building in C3A is 3.78, and that's what the applicant is requesting here. The bulk and scale of buildings in the area is varied. Again, this block contains single-family homes, duplexes, an 18-unit apartment building, and as you go north, west, and even east of the site, there's much larger mixed-use developments and even older buildings that are much larger in scale. There are 2 yard variances that have been requested. The first is a variance to the rear yard setback. That is for this portion of the building that's along the alley on the east side. The setback requirement here is solely due to the fact that the applicant is proposing windows on that side of the building. Staff is recommending approval of that variance. I won't go into great detail because I've talked enough already, but essentially there's no impact to the access of light and air for adjacent properties. We want windows on that side of the building. It's allowed per building code, and they are proposing a step back here to allow for a sight triangle for vehicles that are exiting out the alley onto Lake Street. Public Works has taken a look at the plans and the way the sight triangle is proposed. They believe that it's adequate to allow for safe egress from the alley out onto Lake Street. There's also a front yard setback variance requested. That front yard setback variance impacts a small portion of the building right here as along Emerson. The front yard setback requirement is for the south 25 feet of the property. That's due to the adjacent residential use to the south. The applicant has set the building back 20 feet here, but it needs to be 25 feet. So it's a 5-foot by 15-foot section of the building that encroaches into the required front yard. Staff's recommending denial of that variance. Coming into compliance with the zoning code requirement there would be a pretty small adjustment to the building. And there's also a very established setback pattern along Emerson that we'd like to maintain, and there's no practical difficulty here for that variance. The final variance is for loading. The applicant has proposed to do loading both on-site that is not within a large loading space, and then potentially on Lake Street on the metered spaces. They're working with Public Works for the 2 to 3 deliveries a week that they expect to come to the hotel could be accommodated in that location. Moving on to site plan review, I'm only going to touch on the things they need alternative compliance for. The first of those is the materials. So when this was before you at committee of the whole, the building was entirely brick. The applicant is now requesting a fiber cement product that's less than 5/8 of an inch thick for more than 30%, so it needs alternative compliance. That's this gray that you're seeing on the front of the building is all fiber cement. It's an Equitone fiber cement material that I went into some detail in the staff report. I have a sample of it here if anyone wants to see it. It's a high density fiber cement product versus a medium density fiber cement product. And based on the specifications that we received from the applicant, it looks like it's a durable material, and we recommend alternative compliance for that. A landscaped yard issue, just due to the angle of the parking along the alley. Windows on the south elevation, we're asking that they add a few windows into the office space in this location, and otherwise granting alternative compliance due to the fact that they have a window requirement on 3 sides. And the entrance into the hotel is facing Lake Street, which technically is their corner side yard, instead of Emerson, which is their front yard. So they need alternative compliance there. There are many, many, many pieces of correspondence in your staff reports, both in your original packet and your supplemental. There's a letter in there from the Carrig neighborhood recommending denial or detailing their opposition to the project. There are roughly 215 pages of additional correspondence. Those aren't form letters. Those are all individual pieces of correspondence that people drafted. There's a lot of interest in this report. I couldn't give you analysis of how many are for or against the project, but it seemed like a pretty even split as things were coming in. So I will finally stop there and can answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, are there any questions of staff? Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you for the very, very thorough staff report. It's good. It's good. I was wondering, you know, I tend to agree that the rezoning probably is consistent with the small area plan. Do you know, I mean, why wasn't it rezoned back when this was adopted? Back 7 or so years ago?
2008,
yeah.
when the small area plan was adopted. I think because the presence of the pedestrian-oriented overlay district didn't allow for any of the auto-oriented uses that we really don't want to see here. Beyond that, I don't know what the thinking was at that time. The activity center boundary did not change with the adoption of the small area plan. There are a couple of ways in which the existing activity center boundary don't necessarily fit with adopted policy. We had one just a couple of weeks ago that was in the activity center, but it actually called for, I think, medium density development. So that boundary was never changed after the small area plan was adopted, and I couldn't give you the exact detail as to why that was, but it didn't change.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Vreeland.
Yes, reading the small area plan, this particular location does not seem consistent for my reading of the small area plan because it's south of Lake Street. So in the small area plan, there are numerous references. One of the pieces of correspondence has highlighted yellow for all the places where the kind of development for this location is described. Can you tell me why those? Page 60, 61, 72, 85, 82, 85 in the small area plan, the actual point.
This in the urban village area in the South Subdistrict, where it's calling for dense mixed-use development on the side of Lake Street, which is what the applicant's proposing. That's the type of development that's consistent with the C3A district. It calls for mixed use in this location, and it calls for urban-oriented development. All of those things staff finds consistent with C3A zoning.
But if you look at the small area plan, the height is, so there's greater height between the Greenway and Lake Street, and less height and less walling, and more transition, more step backs, more transition for the neighborhood feel. So my reading of the small area plan is that this is not consistent with all those pieces and parts of it not being in the activity center. Yes, it's close to an activity center. It's consistent with a comprehensive plan, but it does not seem consistent with a small area plan.
So, Commissioner Vreeland,
I don't know if that's a question.
you didn't really ask a question, but maybe, Kimberly, you could clarify how some of those references to building height are interpreted in that plan.
So we acknowledge this is not a 4-story building. If you look at the diagram for this particular site, it calls for a 4-story building in this location. We're also looking at, if this were a 4-story building, what would that look like as perceived from the pedestrian scale, as perceived from the properties south of the site where you have lower density residential uses, and as perceived even as you're coming down Lake Street. And really that perception of a 4-story building versus a 6-story building from those vantage points, there's not a lot of difference in the impact. We looked at the shadowing studies. The small area plan acknowledges that there is an analysis that can be done to allow for increased height beyond what's called for in the plan, which are the same findings that we do under the conditional use permit for height that I just presented to you. We looked at the character of the area. We look at the impact on surrounding uses. We look at the shadowing and the access to light and air. And we found that in this case, because those residential uses are south of the site, the building steps down as the plan calls for, and they're leaving 17 feet between the building and the residential uses to the south, that we felt that the impact of a 6-story building was equivalent to what was called for in the plan.
But it's not consistent with small area plan.
It is not 4 stories. That is acknowledged.
Commissioner Vreeland, we can get to a discussion a little later in the meeting. Commissioner Rockwell, do you have a question? Does anyone else have a question of staff? If there are no further questions, I'll open the public hearing on this item. I'd like to ask the applicant to speak first. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, you'll have no more than 5 minutes. If you don't mind, touch on the need for that setback variance along Emerson, and maybe you could also talk a little bit about the fiber cement material that you're proposing. And Commissioner Slack will be keeping time for us, so you may hear from him.
Great, I'll try to be brief. Thanks
Please
for...
state your name and address.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Graves with Graves Hospitality, and thank you for your time tonight. we've been looking at trying to put a hotel into Uptown for a very, very long time, for at least 8 years. And I consider myself a neighbor. I don't live in the specific Uptown area, but I live in the vicinity. And my father is moving over onto homes and 31st, so he's in the neighborhood as well. But we have spent a lot of time coming up with what we think is a very thoughtful plan for this location. It is something that we've heard a lot of outreach from businesses and homeowners and people who rent in the area of the need of a hotel. We love the location. We think it's the perfect location for a hotel in Uptown, kind of connecting the Uptown area with the Lynn Lake area and all the activity that's going on kind of between those two spaces with great food and beverage options and retail. When we first presented the plan, it was quite a bit different. We did a 9-story building, all weighted on Lake Street, to try to buffer the neighborhood from sound in that perspective. We got some positive feedback from the committee of the whole, although when we presented the plan to the neighborhood, there were some concerns about that specific plan. So we spent many meetings back and forth with many different neighborhood associations, business associations, and neighbors, coming up with the plan that you see today. Some of the concerns that were alleviated, we brought down the height significantly. We brought down the massing by about 20%. We turned the windows so that they do not look over the residential portions of the neighborhood, and also even changed some of the skin of the building based upon some feedback from different neighbors. We'd like to bring Pete up to kind of explain a little bit what we're asking for regarding the side yard setback on the Emerson side of the building to maintain our consistent guest rooms. We do have kind of a U-shaped building, and it's about 5 feet by about 15 feet. You can see this diagram here. The little white side, or that little white line there, shows the area that we're encroaching on that setback requirement. The blue area is an area that we could build to try to accommodate the same number of guest rooms. However, we feel that bringing the building closer to the neighborhood would not be the right thing to do, and based upon the neighborhood feedback, we are still requesting the encroachment there. By the way, we can forego the small balconies that we do have on 2 different guest rooms on that step back on the 5-story section. Just something, it seemed like it was thoughtful, but it was very small. I don't think it would have an impact, but we would be willing to definitely forego that. So, Pete, did you have some things to add to that? I just want to kind of keep brief. I know there's probably other people who'd like to comment on this, but do you have any questions for me personally?
All right. Commissioner Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. About the materials, I think it was the December neighborhood meeting where there was a discussion about the building materials, and the previous iterations had all been brick. And then I think it was because folks at that meeting actually several people asked for more of an interesting kind of design on the front. Is that what led to the material? I'm just a little concerned that now we have like a lower quality material than what was originally proposed. So can you talk through the design decision about the materials?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a lower quality material, but it is a more modern looking material. There was some concern with, our intention was to have it very fitting with the neighborhood and a little bit more nostalgic with the brick and the types of windows that we're going to be using to make it feel like it has been grounded there for a while. But the feedback was all the other development on Lake Street is much more modern, and they wanted something a little bit more, they called it edgy, I guess. And so this is a product that we came up with that we think achieves that look. But yeah, that was based upon the feedback that we heard from the neighborhood. There were many changes, by the way, from the feedback that we heard from the neighborhood that were not necessarily our original or our what we had hoped to do. But
All right. Commissioner Magrino.
So that's not the color, is it? Okay. Is it when
color at all. That's not even the texture.
okay.
It's just the fiberboard itself, just to show the density of it.
All right. Are there any other questions of the applicant? If there are none, we can move on to some other speakers. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, since I do expect a lot of you want to speak on this item, we're going to limit the total amount of testimony to 45 minutes. So the public hearing will be open 6:01 now. So the public hearing will be open no later than 6:46. And we'll also limit individual speakers to no more than 2 minutes. And again, I'll ask that you keep your comments brief and be sure to address the actual applications that are before us and not other issues, and also be mindful of not repeating things others have said. So Commissioner Slack will be keeping time for us, so you may hear from him if you run long. So who would like to go first? Yes, please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Ashok Darwal. I live at 4548 Vincent Avenue South. I'm here to support the Graves Hospitality Group. I'm a local business owner who has been scouting the Uptown area for over a year, looking for retail space. And as soon as I come up to DuPont, I turn around. And I feel like this property actually is the glue between Uptown, which I think you call the Activity Center, and then Lynn Lake. There is a very big disconnect right at Emerson right now in terms of attractiveness to retailers, and I think this property would really help bridge a gap that exists right now. And as you look at Uptown in general, from a year ago to today, there's a lot more retail vacancy than there's ever been in the year that I've been scouting it out, and I'm talking about Hennepin mainly. So I feel like this property would actually, as well as the Cheapo project, would really help connect the Lynn Lake area as well as the Uptown, the Kellen Square area. I've also been following the Graves Hospitality Group for many years, and also think that they will do a very good job as local investors in the community, and will do a project that we're very proud of. So that's what I just wanted to come and say. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Who would like to speak next? Yes, please state your name and address for the record.
Michael Hart. I'm a resident of Minneapolis, and I'm also co-founder and owner of Mono, which is an advertising agency. We're about 100 employees in the Mosaic building at 1350 in Lagoon. We started our company about 11 years ago in Uptown because we fell in love with many of the things that the residents love about Uptown. We love going to lunch at Lucia's, walking around the lake, the many restaurants after work. It's been a great home for us, and we're really happy to be a big part of the community. One of the few drawbacks, actually, of having a business in Uptown that has so many people, clients from out of state, is the lack of a hotel. And many of our clients are actually national clients that are coming in town, and downtown or Bloomington's really the only option. There's no hotel close to us. Also, we have a lot of recruiting. We've hired over 40 people in the last year, and many of those people we recruited from out of state. And it's nice to be able to have an opportunity for them not just to come and see Mono, but actually be in the neighborhood to see how great Uptown is. And to be able to have a hotel right there would be such a benefit, I believe. We also have another office in San Francisco and have a lot of employers that are going back and forth between the Minneapolis office and San Francisco office. I've seen the plans. I see it as a great additive part to the community. It's a great, wonderful, vibrant part, and I strongly support it on behalf of Mono. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. I'm Joan Marks. I live at 3020 Emerson Avenue South. I am opposed to the hotel as proposed and urge you to deny approval of the requested land use applications. I'd like to speak about community opposition to the proposed hotel and the floor area variance. I too think that a hotel in our area could be a nice addition, but a hotel of this scale should be built north of Lake Street as designated in the Uptown Small Area Plan. My main premise in opposition of the proposed hotel is to uphold and maintain the USAP. At our January neighborhood Carrick meeting, we voted, 41 to 10 with one abstention to oppose the hotel's land use applications and recommend city denial of them. The Lowry Hill East Neighborhood Association also voted to oppose the proposed hotel land use applications. As of 2 p.m. today, 428 people have signed our online petition in opposition of the proposed hotel. We have an additional 30 people who signed our paper petition, which we walked through our neighborhood over President's Weekend in January. Our total number of signatures then is 458. These signatures represent 81% Minnesota residents, 71% Minneapolis residents, and 34% of residents living in the 55408 area code where the proposed hotel will be. This robust response can't be ignored or discounted. It is a strong show of support from people who live there for the points we have delineated in our petition, which you should have a copy of, and it upholds the USAP principles. Another major area of concern is the floor area variance. There are several findings in the staff report that are incorrect. The first required finding on page 12 states practical difficulties exist in complying with the ordinance because of...
You've gone over 2 minutes.
Okay.
Now.
I have?
You have.
Oh,
I know,
okay.
it goes quick.
Oh, sorry. Well, I really do think it'd be a valuable amenity. I would just like to see it built on the north side of Lake Street where it belongs with the small area plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to speak next? Yes, please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
Hi, my name's Dave Potter, and I live at 31st and between Emerson and Girard and Fremont. And I would probably benefit from having a hotel in my area. So it doesn't directly